the Zodiac Killer. The rain beat down in a relentless, steady rhythm, blurring the neon lights of the city into a smeared palette of colors on the slick pavement. I sat in my car, fingers drumming against the steering wheel, staring at the old police files spread out on the passenger seat. Pages yellowed with age, ink smeared from years of handling. Photos of crime scenes, grainy and black and white, stared back at me. A twisted mosaic of violence. The Zodiac Killer. The name was burned into my mind, as familiar to me as my own. It was an obsession that had driven me for years, a puzzle that never quite fit together. I wasn't a cop, never had been, but the mystery had sucked me in, like a whirlpool pulling me deeper and deeper until there was no escape. No matter how many times I tried to walk away, the case always pulled me back. It all started innocently enough, a fascination with true crime that grew into something darker. I thought I could solve it, thought I could be the one to crack the code. It was arrogant, really. After all, if the police, FBI, and countless professionals couldn't do it, what chance did I have? But there was something they didn't have. A letter. One that had never been released to the public. I'd stumbled upon it in an old box of my late uncle's belongings. A retired journalist who had once been obsessed with the Zodiac Killer, too. The letter was written in the same jagged, deliberate handwriting as the others, signed with the same ominous symbol, a circle with a cross through it. But this letter, this one was different. There was no code, no taunt, just a date and a location. Asterisk, asterisk, September 13, 1971. Angels Rest Cemetery. Midnight. Asterisk, asterisk. For weeks I'd stared at that letter, debating whether to go. The cemetery was an hour's drive from the city, nestled deep in the woods where the shadows seemed to linger just a little longer. Eventually, curiosity got the best of me. I packed my bag with a flashlight, a notebook, and my old recorder. My makeshift detective kit. Now here I was, parked just outside the cemetery gates, the wrought iron archway looming over me like some silent sentinel. The rain wasn't letting up, but the letter was clear. Midnight. I glanced at my watch. 11:45 p.m. I had 15 minutes to muster up the courage. A flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed by a low rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the ground beneath me. I took a deep breath, grabbed my bag, and stepped out of the car. The rain soaked through my jacket in seconds, chilling me to the bone as I made my way through the gates. The cemetery stretched out before me, rows of headstones rising from the earth like jagged teeth. The wind howled through the trees, making the ancient oaks groan and creak. I found the spot easily enough. A weathered statue of an angel, wings outstretched, its face worn smooth by time. The date on the tombstone at its base read September 13th, 1948. I crouched down, inspecting the ground. Nothing seemed out of place, no sign of anything unusual. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark, but it only illuminated more of the same. Just stone and earth. Then I saw it. Something glinting in the mud near the statue's base. A small metal object half buried. I reached down, pulling it free. It was an old rusted key, its teeth jagged and uneven. I turned it over in my hand, puzzled. Suddenly the wind died down. The air became still, unnaturally so, as if the world was holding its breath. My heart pounded in my chest and I looked around, my flashlight sweeping the graves. But there was nothing, just the dark. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper just behind me. I spun around, the beam of light slicing through the rain, but there was no one there. Just the statue, looming over me like a silent guardian. Then the whisper came again, this time clearer, closer. "Help me!" My blood ran cold. It was a woman's voice, soft and pleading. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. The cemetery was empty. I was sure of it. I wanted to leave. Every instinct told me to get out of there, to run back to the car and never look back. But that damn curiosity kept me rooted in place. I took a step closer to the statue, the voice growing louder, more desperate. "Help me!" And then I saw it. Beneath the angel's outstretched hand, the earth looked disturbed, as if something, or someone, had recently been buried there. The key in my hand felt heavy, as if it was meant for something far more sinister than a rusty lock. I reached down, brushing away the wet dirt with trembling fingers. Beneath the surface, there was a wooden hatch, weathered and worn. I slipped the key into the lock and turned it. The creak of the hinge was deafening in the silence. The hatch swung open, revealing a dark tunnel leading deep into the earth. I stared down into the abyss, my flashlight barely piercing the blackness below. A smell wafted up, a sickly sweet stench that turned my stomach. Something was down there, something that had been buried for a long time. But before I could react, before I could even think about what to do next, a hand shot out of the darkness, grabbing my wrist with an icy grip. I screamed, dropping the flashlight. The light spun wildly as it hit the ground, casting grotesque shadows across the tombstones. I tried to pull away, but the hand held tight, dragging me toward the open hatch. In the dim light, I saw her, A woman, her face pale and hollow, her eyes wide with terror. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Just that same desperate whisper, "Help me." Then just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. The grip on my wrist loosened, and I stumbled back, falling hard onto the wet ground. The hatch slammed shut with a thunderous boom that echoed through the cemetery. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. But when I looked down at my wrist, there was nothing there. No mark, no sign that anyone had touched me at all. The rain poured down harder, washing away the disturbed earth, making it look as though nothing had ever happened. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had felt. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam now weak and flickering, and backed away from the statue. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Another letter, nailed to the back of the angel's wing. The ink was fresh, the paper crisp, untouched by the rain. With trembling hands, I tore it free and opened it. The message was simple, written in that same jagged hand. "This is only the beginning." I fled the cemetery, the wind howling in my ears, the rain lashing at my face. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, something dark and ancient that had been awakened from its slumber. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder, was the Zodiac Killer just a man? Or was he something far more sinister, something connected to forces that none of us could ever hope to understand? Sleep didn't come that night. How could it? Every creak, every whisper of wind against the windows set my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the image of the woman from the cemetery, her hollow eyes, her decaying skin. What was she trying to tell me? Who was she? Morning came too quickly, but it didn't bring any relief. The light of day did nothing to chase away the shadows that clung to me. I had to get out of the house. Had to do something. Anything. The journal was the only lead I had, but it felt like a dead end. The Order of the Black Sun? Dark rituals? It was absurd, except it wasn't. Not after what I'd seen. I called Marcus, but he didn't pick up. A cold knot of dread tightened in my gut, but I pushed it down. He was probably just busy. I left a message and grabbed my bag, determined to follow up on my only lead, the cemetery. I drove back to Angel's Rest, the narrow road winding through dense woods that seemed to press in on all sides. The cemetery was even more desolate in the daylight, the headstones casting long, sharp shadows across the ground. The angel statue loomed in the distance, its wings outstretched, its face as unreadable as ever. I parked the car and made my way toward the statue, my eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the tunnel. But when I reached the spot where I had found the hatch, the earth was undisturbed. No sign of the wooden door, no indication that anything had ever been there. It was like the ground had swallowed it whole. Frustration boiled up inside me. I had seen it. I knew it was real. I wasn't losing my mind. There had to be something here, something I had missed. I circled the statue, examining every inch of it. That's when I noticed something new. The angel's eyes, blank and smooth, had a faint red tint to them, as if stained by something that had seeped into the stone over time. I leaned in closer, my fingers brushing against the surface. The stain wasn't just a trick of the light. It was real, dark, dried blood. I recoiled, a shiver running down my spine. What kind of place was this? What kind of rituals had taken place here? I stepped back, trying to piece it all together when a voice behind me made me jump. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around to see an old man standing a few feet away. He was hunched over, his face weathered and worn, his eyes sharp and accusing. He held a shovel in one hand, dirt caked on his boots. "Who are you?" I asked, my heart still racing. "Caretaker," he said gruffly. "This cemetery's been here a long time, seen a lot of things. Things that don't belong in the daylight." I narrowed my eyes. "Do you know about the Zodiac? About the killings?" The old man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I know more than I'd like to. You're not the first to come sniffing around here, thinking you'll be the one to solve it. But some things are better left buried." He started to walk away, but I stepped forward, desperate for answers. "Wait, please. What do you know about the Order of the Black Sun?" The caretaker froze, his shoulders stiffening. When he turned back to me, there was fear in his eyes, a fear that sent a cold chill down my spine. "You've already seen too much," he whispered. "You should leave before it's too late. Before they find you." "Who?" I demanded. "Who's after me?" The old man shook his head, backing away. "You've opened a door that can't be closed. They'll come for you now, just like they did for the others." "What others?" I pressed, but he didn't answer. He just turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving me standing alone in the cemetery, my mind racing. The others? Who were the others? Had they been like me, chasing a mystery only to find something far darker than they'd bargained for? I needed answers, and there was only one place left to go. Back to my uncle's house. If he had been onto something before his death, maybe there was more there. Something I had missed. Something that could tell me what the Order of the Black Sun was and how it was connected to the Zodiac. I drove straight to his old house, the small, weather-beaten place he had lived in for most of his life. It had been abandoned since his death, left to gather dust. The door creaked open with a groan and I stepped inside, the musty smell of stale air hitting me immediately. The house was exactly as I remembered it. Cluttered, filled with old newspapers, books, and stacks of papers that seemed to cover every surface. I made my way to his study, where he had spent most of his time in the years leading up to his death. His desk was still cluttered with notes, and I sifted through them, looking for anything I hadn't seen before. That's when I found it. A hidden compartment in the bottom drawer. It was small, barely noticeable. But when I pried it open, I found a set of old photographs, yellowed with age. They were of a group of people, standing in front of what looked like the cemetery gates at Angel's Rest. There were symbols carved into the stones. Symbols I didn't recognize, but that sent a wave of unease through me. At the bottom of the stack was a photo of my uncle, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. They were both smiling, but there was something off about the man, something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. I flipped the photo over, and on the back, in my uncle's handwriting, were the words, "He is one of them. Be careful. The Black Sun watches." My heart raced as I read the words. The man in the photograph, was he part of the Order? And if so, had my uncle been working with him, or had he been trying to expose him? I flipped through the journal, but the rest of the entries were vague, filled with half-formed thoughts and fragmented ideas. Whatever my uncle had been onto, he hadn't had the chance to finish. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from upstairs. A heavy thud, followed by the sound of something dragging across the floor. I froze, listening intently. The house was silent again, but the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and slowly made my way upstairs, each step heavier than the last. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the small lamp in my bedroom. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw it. My bedroom door, slightly ajar, swinging gently as if someone had just passed through. I inched closer, the flashlight shaking in my hand. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking, and stepped inside. The room was empty. But on the bed, spread out like an offering, was another letter, the paper stark white against the dark sheets. I didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to see what it said, but I forced myself to pick it up. The message was short, written in that same jagged hand. "You're not alone." I dropped the letter, my breath catching in my throat. The room suddenly felt colder, the shadows deeper, and then I heard it again. That voice. That same soft whisper. Asterisk, asterisk. Help me. Asterisk, asterisk. But this time it wasn't distant. It was right behind me. I spun around, and there she was. The woman from the cemetery, standing in the doorway, her eyes hollow, her skin pale and mottled with decay. She reached out toward me, her lips moving soundlessly, her fingers clawing at the air. And then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone, leaving me standing alone in the dark, with nothing but the echo of her voice lingering in the air. This was only the beginning, and whatever I had uncovered, whatever darkness I had let into my life, was far from over. And now there was no turning back. I didn't sleep for the next 2 nights. The visions, the whispers, they haunted me, creeping into every corner of my mind, leaving me no peace. The woman's hollow eyes followed me everywhere, and the darkness that had swallowed her seemed to stretch its tendrils into my life, coiling around me tighter and tighter. I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't hide. The only way out was through the mystery, through the fear, through the darkness. Whatever was waiting for me at the end of this nightmare, I had to face it. The next morning, I received a call from Marcus. "Meet me at Angel's Rest," he said, his voice tight, almost breathless. "What did you find?" I asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be something I wanted to hear. "Just get there! You need to see this for yourself!" I hung up and drove straight to the cemetery. The road seemed darker this time, the trees closing in around me like they were trying to swallow me whole. The sky was overcast, heavy with clouds that threatened rain, but the storm wasn't in the sky. It was in the air, a tension I could feel deep in my bones. When I arrived at Angel's Rest, Marcus was waiting for me by the angel statue, his face pale and drawn. He didn't speak as I approached, just gestured for me to follow him. We walked in silence, weaving through the headstones until we reached a small clearing in the far corner of the cemetery. There, half buried in the earth, was a row of freshly disturbed graves. The earth was still soft, the tombstones newly erected, but there were no names, no dates, just blank slabs of stone standing over the freshly turned soil. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus crouched down, brushing away some of the loose dirt to reveal something hidden beneath. Symbols etched into the ground. Symbols that matched the ones I'd seen in the old photographs. Symbols that radiated a dark, ancient power. "They're graves," Marcus said quietly, his eyes never leaving the symbols. "But they're not for the dead." "What do you mean?" I asked, a cold knot of dread forming in my stomach. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes filled with a fear I had never seen in him before. "They're for the living." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Living? Who would..." Before I could finish, a sound echoed through the cemetery, a low, guttural moan that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath us. Marcus stood up quickly, his eyes scanning the graves. "We need to go," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Now!" But before we could move, the ground beneath the graves began to shift, the soil rising and falling as if something was trying to claw its way out. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched in horror. One by one, pale, decaying hands broke through the surface, followed by arms, then heads. The corpses, if you could call them that, dragged themselves out of the earth, their hollow eyes fixed on us, their mouths twisted into grotesque smiles. Marcus grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Run!" he shouted. We sprinted through the cemetery, the sound of the dead clawing their way out of the graves echoing behind us. I didn't dare look back. I could feel them gaining on us, could hear their raspy breaths, their bones cracking and popping as they moved. We reached the angel statue, and for a moment I thought we were safe. But then something else emerged from the shadows. A figure, tall and cloaked in darkness, standing beneath the angel's outstretched wings. It was him, the Zodiac. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, his head cocked to the side as if he was watching us with a sick fascination. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but I could feel his eyes on me. Cold, calculating, devoid of any humanity. Marcus stepped forward, raising his gun. "Stay back!" he shouted. But the Zodiac didn't flinch. Instead, he lifted his hand, and I saw it. A symbol carved into his palm, the same symbol that was etched into the graves. The same symbol that had haunted my nightmares. The symbol of the Black Sun. "I told you," a voice whispered from behind me. I turned, and there she was. The woman. Her ghostly form standing just beyond the statue. Her eyes filled with sorrow. "You're too late." The ground beneath us began to tremble, and the air grew thick with the smell of rot and decay. The dead were closing in, their hollow eyes fixed on us, their hands reaching out, eager to pull us into the darkness with them. Marcus fired his gun, but it did nothing. The bullet passed through the Zodiac's form like smoke, like he wasn't even there. He laughed, a low, mocking sound that sent a wave of terror through me. Then, without warning, the angel statue cracked, its stone wings crumbling to the ground. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, forming unnatural shapes that writhed and slithered across the cemetery. I felt a hand grip my arm, cold, clammy, and unyielding. I looked down, expecting to see one of the dead, but it wasn't them. It was Marcus. His eyes were wide with terror, but his expression was wrong. His face twisted into a grin that didn't belong to him, a grin filled with malice. His grip tightened, and I realized, with a sickening jolt of horror, that it wasn't Marcus anymore. Something had taken him. "You opened the door," he said, his voice no longer his own. "Now you belong to us." I struggled to break free, but his grip was too strong. The dead closed in around us, their hands reaching out, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. "Join us, join us, join us." And then, just as all hope seemed lost, the woman's voice cut through the darkness one last time, soft but clear. "Run, now." With a surge of adrenaline, I tore myself free from Marcus's grasp and sprinted toward the car. The dead reached for me, their fingers brushing against my skin, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I jumped into the car, slammed the door, and floored the gas. The tires screeched against the wet pavement as I sped out of the cemetery, the dead fading into the distance behind me. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, the city lights flickering on the horizon. My heart was still racing, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The Zodiac, the Order of the Black Sun, the dead, they were all real, and they weren't finished with me. Not yet. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the dead following me, but there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out behind me. But as I looked closer, I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road watching me. Tall, cloaked in darkness, with the symbol of the Black Sun carved into his palm. The Zodiac! He raised his hand in a mock salute, his grin barely visible beneath the hood. Asterisk, asterisk. This was only the beginning. Asterisk, asterisk. And somewhere, deep inside, I knew I would never escape.